So it's with great pleasure that on behalf of the Times and the Sunday Times, I'm to welcome you to the Bursary and Scholarship Pavilion at the Independent School Show. I'm Helen Davies and I look after editorial projects on the paper. For the final talk today, I'm delighted to introduce two renowned experts in the field of private education. Anthony is head of Stowe School since 2003. He's regularly won Headmaster of the Year and has been shortlisted for School of the Year more than once. And Charles is the founder of Bonas MacFarlane, London's leading educational consultancy. They've got a lot of big questions to ask and to answer, I believe, lots of myths to bust, and a half-hour discussion about the truth behind independent schools, how to choose the right school for your child, and why taxing education is wrong. It's quite a lot to get through, but there will be time for questions at the end, so you will come round with a microphone. But for now, Anthony, it's over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Helen, and thank you to the Independent Schools Show for supporting independent schools at quite a challenging time. First of all, we talk about the 100%, not the 7% that are in independent schools and the 93% that are educated in state schools. So this slightly artificial divide. We want every child to have an extraordinary and excellent education. Why does it matter? Because Thomas Edison said the brain of a child is the most amazing thing that has ever been invented. And what we're talking about is how can we future-proof your children? We're living in a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. We've just seen the elections in America. We've got wars in the Middle East. We've got a war in mainland Europe. Technology which is changing the world of education, the world of work. And we need to be creating children with attitudes and dispositions and who are nimble, agile, flexible, and able to work in a world where the jobs of the future haven't yet been invented. Technology is, they're going to have to use technology which hasn't yet come through, solving problems that we're just beginning to understand the scale and complexity of, for example, climate change. Now, first of all, just some background on independent schools and why they matter in the educational ecosystem. An independent school is a school that is not funded by the state, and you should be congratulated and applauded for coming here tonight and supporting independent schools and thereby relieving the state of the burden of educating your children. And this self-sacrifice can only be a benefit to the state system, which is, as you know, overcrowded and struggling with the weight of educating the entire nation's children. And why should the state have a monopoly over education? Ronald Reagan used to say that the 10 words that he dreaded most were, "Hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So why does the government have a monopoly over education? Does Angela Rayner have a better understanding of your child than any of the schools who are displaying here today? And on the subject, Helen mentioned VAT, so we might as well go into VAT straight away. The European Convention on Human Rights, Article 2, Protocol number 1, safeguards the idea of pluralism and choice in education, saying that it's essential for the preservation of a democratic society, as conceived by the Convention. And a government that chooses to impose VAT on fees undermines the pluralism, the choice, the diversity within that education ecosphere. And it places an unjustified barrier to allow parents to educate children in accordance with their wishes, in accordance with their philosophy, their religious beliefs, and also choosing the education that suits their particular needs. And that might be special educational needs, and we know that there are many, many children educated in independent schools that have special educational needs but don't have education, health and care plans. The other thing that worries me about the legislation is that this is a tax which doesn't apply to any other form of education. It doesn't apply to universities, it doesn't apply to private tutoring. And again, European human rights legislation protects the rights of parents to choose the type of school, and there should be no financial penalty imposed by the state. Now, of course, I recognize the government's mandate to impose this policy, but I think it is entirely correct and appropriate for people like me to challenge and question the decision if we believe that it's incompatible with human rights legislation. And this is not just an abstract idea. This is an act of will by the state which has consequences. So this afternoon I heard that a local school to us, a little prep school called Cardus, which is 10 miles away from Stowe, is going to close, likely to close in the spring. And the reason that has been given, a combination of raising VAT in the middle of the academic year, loss of the charitable business rates relief, increasing employers' national insurance contributions. So this is an act by the state which is having a deleterious effect on the outcomes of children. And people will lose their jobs, historic assets will be sold off. And my belief generally is that government should do no harm, and you should be celebrated for choosing alternatives to the state system. And I think, it's about time that we dispelled some of the myths around private education. Not all independent schools are clad in ivy with crenellated towers. Most independent schools are operating tight margins. They offer excellent value for money and provide outstanding opportunities. Now, before anyone from the press accuses me of hypocrisy, I admit Stowe is housed in the Ducal Palace. We've got one or two old Stoics here. It is the most amazing building set in 750 acres of land. But in my defense, most of the land is run in partnership with the National Trust, where at the moment we're welcoming about 5,000 people a day to come to an installation on D-Day, 1,400 silhouette statues. It's an amazing piece of art, very incredibly moving. And the house is run in conjunction with another charity called Stowe House Preservation Trust. And our biggest initiative, our most important initiative in the last 10 years has been something called Change 100 to build up an endowment of £100 million, which will allow 100 children in perpetuity to be educated at the school free of charge. And last night I was at an event in London for Street Child, a charity I co-chair. We built a school in Liberia last year, and last night we were fundraising for schools in northeastern Nigeria. So that's why I think it matters. Now, what about independent schools? What sets us apart? First, it's the outstanding teaching. Again, I'm not saying you don't get outstanding teaching in state schools, but independent schools are able to attract incredibly talented specialist teachers. There's an academic from Stanford called Eric Hanesek, and he says that the top 10% of teachers impart 3 times as much knowledge and wisdom as the bottom 10%. So it's all about attracting the right caliber of teachers, the caliber of teacher who can inspire a real love of learning and inculcate the change maker skills, complex problem solving, emotional intelligence, social literacy, communication and technology, and create teachers who are mentors and coaches. So gone are the days of doing what I'm doing, performing, the sage on stage. Instead, we've got the guide by the side. So the Latin for education is educare, to draw out, to lead forth. It's all about lighting fires, not filling buckets, and encouraging pupils to get into that psychological state of flow where that you're really enjoying something. Time passes, you're not even aware of how much time you put into something. And that's what a really good independent school education can provide. I worked out on the train up here that most children are spending 16,380 hours in school. And most children have something called tautitis, which is sitting there, as you are very politely, but slightly passively, listening to their teachers. And this is the worst form of teaching, where I'm lecturing you, I'm trying to get eye contact, you're all being very kind and attentive, but I guess you're suffering a bit from tautitis. And what I would love to see in a lesson, I would love to go into the mosh pit and find out, what do you want from education? What are you looking for in a good school? Finding out what it is that you think your child would benefit from most in a school. So those 16,380 hours can be spent to their maximum benefit. You'll have more than 50 teachers. How many of you can remember what you were doing in the fourth form, so when you were 15, in chemistry or physics or biology or history? So much of that knowledge has gone, has been wasted. So one of the things that independent schools do really well is innovation in the curriculum. Second thing we do really well, co-curricular activities. A school like Stowe will have more than 100 clubs and activities, a wealth of sports, everything from music, drama, the Combined Cadet Force, Duke of Edinburgh, lectures, debates, Model United Nations, community service, eco clubs. Among the more unusual activities at Stowe, we have fives, polo, fencing, beagling. There's an F1, we're near Silverstone, so there's an F1 club. I mentioned Street Child, we have a Street Child committee, clay pigeon shooting, corkscrew, there's a wine tasting society, and we even have something called the Stowe Award. So we measure success by engagement and participation, not just by the metrics that you're getting in exams. It's about your endeavor. How much are you putting back into society? How many plays have you attended? Have you auditioned for the orchestra, the choir? And getting that engagement in the arts, because the arts is an introduction into the best that has been known, seen, created in the whole of human civilization. A third reason for choosing an independent school, smaller class sizes. Now, there's an Australian academic called John Hattie who says that actually class sizes don't really matter in terms of teaching and learning. It's all about the ability of the teacher to connect. But they do matter if you're a teacher. If you've got a class of 35, you're unlikely to set a really challenging piece of homework because that's a lot of marking. So the smaller class sizes of 15 for GCSEs, 10 for A-level, that allows you to provide a really bespoke teaching and learning experience. So most of the independent schools pride themselves on smaller class sizes and teachers really getting to know each and every pupil. Next, facilities. Now, we've all heard about the arms race between schools, sports halls being built, fencing halls. Some schools have even got debating chambers. But one of the things that doesn't get reported very much is that this creates an elite in music, an elite in drama, an elite in sport. 1/3 of the athletes in Paris at the Olympics this summer, 1/3 of them came from independent schools. At Stowe, my school, we've got an Olympic gold medalist rower, James Rudkin. We have the England opening batsman, Ben Duckett. Those are just two outstanding sportsmen. In acting, we've got Henry Cavill, who's the new David Niven. Music, Roger Hodgson, and a new artist called Tash Woods, who's performing under the name Dylan. I thought that name had already been taken, but she's doing rather well. Curriculum is also important. We provide GCSEs, A-levels, that's fine. But you'll also find a more diverse range of subjects. Lots of modern languages, not just German and French. Classics, alive and well. Politics, psychology, my subject, history of art. I don't think history of art is taught in any state school. Engineering, we run a BTEC in engineering, and we have a partnership with Silverstone, and it works incredibly well. In fact, one of our leavers this year has got a apprenticeship to work with MacFarlane, which is going to be certified by the University of London. We run EPQs, these are extended project qualifications in which pupils can delve deeply into a subject that they enjoy, and that's really important. We prepare pupils for the SATs for American universities and Oxbridge. The day is a lot longer than it is in the maintained sector. The curriculum divides into thirds, so we have a third of the day spent teaching and learning, a third on sport and co-curricular, and then a third on individual pursuits. And then academic results. You have seen the league tables. You'll have seen the same old schools that dominate the league tables. They're generally the independent schools. Now, comparing the selective independent schools with non-selective schools compares sheep and goats, apples and oranges, and I'm not going to do that. But the measurement that I really think is important in independent schools is we measure the value added. So what happens when your child comes into the school, we'll do a baseline test, and that baseline test will generate the predicted scores for the GCSEs and A-levels, and we will almost guarantee, not quite, but almost guarantee that the actual score will be at least one grade, if not 2 grades higher than the predicted score from the baseline test. And I think those value-added scores are so much more interesting and powerful as tools of measuring excellence than the absolute scores that you get in the A-levels and the GCSEs. And then on to the end, final 2 points, pastoral care, wraparound pastoral care. At my school, we're only 101 years old. The founding headmaster was called J.F. Roxburgh. It was his ambition to civilize, to liberalize, to create a different sort of education, to turn on its head the Victorian, rather brutal form of boarding schools. And so we were the first school to really value the individual and to find out what the individual pupil wanted to be good at. And you're allowed to make mistakes as long as you acknowledge those mistakes and move on. The dramatist Samuel Beckett told one of his actors to fail better when he was complaining about not being able to understand a text. He said, fail better next time. And that's really the mantra for a good school, is you are allowed to fail. It doesn't matter if you don't get it right first time. We're interested in the whole child, supporting their mental, social, physical, and intellectual development. One of the things that sets independent schools apart, this is the final point, is the distinctive ethos that each school has. Going around this amazing show, I can see 10 schools around me, and I can give you about 3 different characteristics for each and every one of those schools. And what stands out when I look around here is that many of these schools are doing extremely well in the metrics measuring academic performance. But what I can't show you is the metric that measures conscientiousness, gratitude, humility, determination, perseverance, collaboration, empathy, humility, respect. And my closing argument is that those are the character virtues that are a better predictor for lifelong success than any certificate that you're going to get at school. It is your character, it is your attitude, it is your personality that will determine your success. And in Britain, in 2024, we are not going to be able to compete on labour costs. We're not going to be able to compete on raw materials. But where we can compete is in intellectual capital, in creativity, in social responsibility, and entrepreneurial flair. And again, just before I came in, I had a quick check to see what are the most in-demand skills for jobs in 2024. And these are the jobs that we're looking to fill vacancies for at the moment. Skills in blockchain, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, user experience design. How many of you have got any qualifications in UX design or cloud computing? None of you. So this is all about training children to be adaptable, flexible, agile enough to turn into young citizens who can take a whole portfolio of jobs and careers. Here are jobs which didn't even exist 2 years ago. Drone fleet operator, offshore vertical farmer, 4D printing designer, metaversal architect, avatar creator, crypto security advisor, nanosurgeon, digital detox advisor. That's the one I like best. I need a digital detox advisor. So why we're here? Independent schools combine the best that has been known and thought in terms of character education with the skills which can future-proof your children so that they can thrive. We're now a quarter of the way through the 21st century. The children who are leaving our schools will be alive in the 22nd century. And it's all about giving our children that certainty of having a life that's full of purpose and giving them a meaning and giving them a sense of the transcendent, something numinous, something beyond just ourselves, to make them change makers so that they can change themselves, then they can go and change others, and then together, perhaps, change the world and make it a better place. Thank you very much for listening. Charles, over to you.
Thank you very much. Nancy, do have a seat?
Do sit down.
So there's all sorts of things we could take from that very inspiring talk, and thank you very much for coming and talking.
It's always good to see you, Charles, and thank you and thank you for the Times and Sunday Times for sponsoring today.
Can we just talk a little bit about Stowe, because I'm fascinated by Stowe for all sorts of reasons, and I just learned today that had the group of educators not bought the property in 1922, it would have most likely been knocked down. Is that true?
Trust Charles to have done his research. It's absolutely true. So we, as I mentioned in the talk, we're incredibly lucky to have our school housed in a palace, a ducal palace, and there are 31 listed buildings. The greatest architects of the 18th century worked at Stowe. In fact, landscape gardening was invented at Stowe. I think it's the only original art form that has been produced by the British people. That's another controversial point. Unlikely.
It's a very interesting one.
But yeah. You're right. Stowe was earmarked for demolition. After World War I, there was a feeling that 18th century ducal palaces and garden follies were a reminder of a decadent past, and that they didn't really have a place in the future for the heroes who were coming back from the trenches. And the plan was for ribbon development housing from Buckingham all the way up to Silverstone. And the school, a board of governors was put together with somebody called Percy Warrington in charge. And they came up with the £50,000, which was enough to rescue the estate and the house.
Because it's really extraordinary how you've got all these architects overlaying their own work over one another, and the landscape designers. And there's just one very interesting comment that was made, that what we now see as being quintessential English countryside is completely contrived, of course. And some people think it looks rather like the savannah, and so there's a link between how content we were on the savannah and how content you are at Stowe. But do you think growing up in such a beautiful environment has any disadvantages to it? I mean, if you wanted to become a submariner, for example, do you think you might be better off not relying so much on beauty?
I don't know. In the last 20 years, we've produced 4 admirals, one second Sea Lord and one someone who's actually in charge of the entire Navy. So for the most landlocked school in the country, we do pretty well in keeping our links with the sea.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. So there is a theory. I'm an art historian, so there's a theory called the Serengeti theory, which is why are we drawn to landscapes? And the theory that Charles has just alluded to is that we're drawn to these idyllic pastoral landscapes which remind us of the Garden of Eden. So there's a kind of pre-lapsarian thing going there. But also, we've been around as Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, for 6 million years, 10,000 generations, and we are drawn to places which remind us of the savannas. And that's why we put sheep and cattle and cows and the tree belts that we can climb up to make sure there are no predatory animals. And that's why we get our sustenance and we're regenerated by nature. And we're drawn to sunsets, we're drawn to big skies, because it reminds us of something. It's an archetypal, atavistic reminder that however civilized we are, however advanced we are, however addicted we are to our phones, that actually we are highly evolved animals. And being in nature reminds us of who we are and what we are and why we are really here. This is really good, really philosophical. Not what I was expecting to talk about at all.
Yeah,
Like in our time version of
Yes.
the Independent.
Exactly.
School Show.
So this is so much better, Charles.
The Temple family who originally lived in Stowe, they acquired their money through the dissolution of the monasteries. So it's not the first time that there's been a bit of a change of the bowling when it comes to trying to take from the rich and give to the not so rich. I mean, do you think there's any argument to suggest that independent schools have been rubbing people's noses in the wrong way? They've become too expensive, they've become too over-facilitized, that they've got too many people whose boats are about the length of your south front, and they don't pay any extra fees.
And they're all now leaving, by the way. So that's another question.
But the problem is, of course, that there are about 2,500 independent schools in the country. Yeah. And most of the image of independent schooling is controlled, if you like, by a handful of schools.
Yes, yeah.
That's a problem, isn't it? Yeah.
No, it is really interesting. Whenever you see a report in any of the newspapers, except for the Times and the Sunday Times, that they immediately go into their stock image catalogue, and you'll see the one that a four-letter word beginning with E, ending with N. And it's always the same image, and it's usually one which represents privilege and elitism, and it stresses the social divisions. What you never hear about are the transformational bursaries and scholarships, and the fact that all of us are. The only reason I'm in independent schools is I don't particularly. I spent a lot of time in my 20s living in Eastern Europe. I was doing a PhD on the Prague Spring in 1968. I found it so depressing that I then changed to history of art, so my PhD was somewhat different. But I remember what that was like, and living under a very oppressive government, which determined exactly where you could go to school, which university, where your jobs were. And that made me feel profoundly skeptical about states that wanted to control every aspect of your life and your family's lives as well. So independent schools, I think, have probably not fought a brilliant campaign in saying why they should exist in this amazing ecosystem of education. So I think you're right. I don't think independent schools have done enough in terms of outreach in explaining why they're so important as employers in the local communities, why so many people rely on independent schools flourishing, but also why you as parents should have the choice to be able to pick a school that suits your values, your philosophies, your religion, and your children's talents and abilities. Why do we have to have a one size that fits everyone? All of you are individuals. All of you have got very different interests. Your children do as well. Why does the state have to assume that it knows best?
I didn't know Elon Musk was involved in independent schools.
He soon will be.
But for me, I use this rather cheesy word, magic dust, because I can't think of a better one.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I like Stowe so much is it doesn't have these ridiculous psychometric barriers to entry. Psychometric being a contradiction in terms. You're a selective school, but you take all sorts of interesting people. And I think what you were talking about in your sort of address there is so potent that you need lots of different ways of thinking to understand the world as it is now. And if you over-select, you just have the same kind of brains in very similar types of classes. And that, to me, is one of the principal reasons that there's been a drop-off in success rates to Oxbridge across the sector. But this sort of magic dust, you've either got it or you haven't in a school. And I think you've got it in droves. So, yeah, if you haven't seen Stowe, I'd very much encourage you to go and have a look at it.
It is the most beautiful school. Of all the league tables that we top, and we've had things like best school of the year, Tatler. Don't know if Tatler's here, but that was 2023. That was great. That was our centenary year. But it is, the first headmaster said no one can attend Stowe without having a sense of beauty that will stay with that child for the rest of their lives. And that's absolutely, and that sense of something numinous, that the appreciation of the aesthetic is something that perhaps is undervalued in schools. Schools have become incredibly utilitarian and rather pedestrian as a result. Most children are asynchronic. They don't learn in the same way. They're asymmetrical. Some of them have overdeveloped mathematical abilities. Some are very good musicians. Some are great linguists. But they're not usually good at everything. And the one thing about independent schools that I think really stands them apart is their ability to bring out the best wherever that is. And it might be in sport, it might be music, it might be drama, it might be dance, but not to limit the child because that child is not good at everything. I don't know how many of you are good at everything. I'm not. I'm good at about 3 things. Talking is one of them. I can talk forever, Charles. Keep going.
Do you think, if anything, independent schools might encourage children to do too many activities? Because when you're an adult, you haven't got time to do that much, have you? I mean, I think there's a bit of a pushback where parents are saying, well, actually, we can only be in one gym at the same time.
Yeah.
Do we really need a debating chamber? Surely it's about price. I mean, have schools got too expensive?
Well, two different questions. So, as I said, the day divides into a third. There's a third that you can't control. You have to do the curriculum. There's no choice. What you do in co-curricular studies is entirely up to you. If you want to spend every afternoon bookbinding or painting or practicing the cello, if you want to be a diploma standard cellist or violinist, you need to do 4 hours practice a day. And I'm very happy for children to specialize. The old days where you had to be a jack of all trades and do however many changed exercises and compulsory sport, those days have now ended. And we're much better at recognizing that children actually know what they want to do and what they're good at, and we encourage them to pursue their interest. And that hierarchy of interest, where the top pupils were measured by how good they were at rugby or cricket, that is now gone. And the children are much more accepting of the differences and the skills. And it might be, you might have a child who's an amazing computer programmer. We've got children who are, I shouldn't probably tell you this, but we've got children who are really interested in cryptocurrencies and are trading in crypto. And they keep telling me that I should put the entire endowment on this particular product, which I haven't done yet. But that's great, isn't it? And you want to encourage those differences.
Well, I think
we're different. We don't make children do lots and lots of different things unless they want to.
Yeah, and I think the point that comes across from you mentioning these very specific new careers is that one can't possibly get a grasp of all of them. But maybe it means that the necessity for entrepreneurship, for delegating, for seeing the bigger picture is as important now as it's ever been, but probably more important. And there's that great comment by Whaley Cohen, who's one of the founders of Shell, wasn't it?
Oh,
Someone said, why do you only employ Oxford classicists? I think he said Oxford classicists, not these newfangled graduates from Imperial College in chemical engineering. He said, well, the classics graduates sell more oil. That's simple as it. But that is probably what you're sort of getting at, isn't really this all-round concept of taking risks as well.
I think it's educating the whole person, and educating that the person to understanding that it's the skills, the dispositions, the habits that you learn that are going to stand you in good stead. It's not so much the material that you're learning, it's how you use that material later on. And when you think about it, most of the things, most of your memories, most of your the strongest attributes in your personality will probably come from your school days. Universities are important in terms of forging friendships, but most of your personalities were forged between the ages of 13 and 18. And the best schools will create personalities that can adapt and evolve and change according to these different demands. Because
I actually agree with you.
I don't think we're going to, I've had pretty much one career. I've always had one other thing on the go at any one time in teaching. But the idea of doing the same job for 40 years is just unthinkable now.
In terms of price, if you look at the cost for your lifetime, if you've had a good education, it makes sense. In fact, it wouldn't make any sense if you didn't gain from it every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And if you get £15, £20 of gain every day for the rest of your life after Stowe, it becomes quite a affordable proposition. It's just cash flow. It's very difficult for families to come up with this money at the same time. That's the problem, I think.
Yeah, no, all of you sitting here and contemplating the massive outlay in fees. If you've got two children and you're looking at a combination of day and boarding, you're looking at £1 million. It's more than most of you will have spent on your houses. And that is insane. I mean, the cost of independent education has skyrocketed, and that does need to be addressed, which is one of the reasons we've come up with Change 100. It's one of the reasons that our fees are actually quite competitive relative to some of the other boarding schools. And it's why we've introduced a day fee, which is about half the price of a boarding fee, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I was just going to interrupt because we might have to finish up soon. So if you've got any questions, do put your hand up. But I just had one, which was then how do you find the right school for your child and know that you're getting value for money?
So the happiness principle for me is pleasure times purpose times the amount of time you're spending. And the result will come from a bit of talent times effort times time. So if you're getting good academic results, if you're looking at the value added, that will tell you what your child is getting out of the school. If your child is flourishing, and you can usually tell whether your child is happy or not, and then the sort of things that are almost imperceptible but really important, the network of children, the social influence, the leadership, the confidence that comes from being in a school where the edges are rubbed off and you're surrounded by children, you're constantly being challenged each day. So those are the things. It's a hard one because most people would just say it's measured by the academic results. But most people's success and happiness in life is not measured by whether they have a degree from Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard. I mean, I don't know about you.
I remember Norman Tebbit being berated at the Oxford Union debate for knowing the price of everything and the value of nothing.
Yeah.
I think value is very subjective. If you look at Warren Buffett, he very rarely looks at the stock prices on Wall Street because they represent a price that's based on the value he doesn't agree with. He has his own valuation metrics. And I think it's very unusual to have a parent saying, well, we're not going to get any value out of this school. It doesn't really happen very much. the value is priceless. Although they're going to knock it down, you can't put a price on being educated in a World Heritage Site.
Yeah,
You can't put a price on a brilliant teacher.
exactly.
Or you can.
You-
It's however much it is per term, but overall you can't. Has anyone got any questions? You've got both Anthony and Charles to speak to. At the back there, Janet has got the microphones coming to you.
Thank you very much for the talk, and I do agree with everything you said. Taxing education is wrong, and unfortunately, when you do that, you're increasing also the barrier for a lot of people to access it.
Yeah.
So how can private schools ensure that those who do get into private schools or independent schools are getting the diverse experience and getting the kind of a really well-rounded view of the world, and it's not just ending up being a very kind of specific profile?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So, as I said, our biggest commitment to social change is something called Change 100, which is to create an endowment for 100 pupils. So we're currently 905 pupils. So this will be one in 9 pupils will be fully funded by the school, and they're drawn from disadvantaged families from all over the UK and abroad. So that's number one. Number two, we've got a number of outreach programs. So one of the reasons I'm sounding pretty stuffed up is I spent half term in northeastern Nigeria. I was in Borno province, places like Adamawa, Yobe, where there's an insurgency, and we have a project called Effect, so Education for Every Child. Today, with the charity that I co-chair, that the school is supporting, is educating 42,000 children in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. We have something called the Big Issue Day just before half term. We were working with Age Concern. We've worked with Leonard Cheshire Disability. We're always raising the issues of the day so that our children are not operating in a comfortable cocoon. Every time there is a national and international event which is important, we encourage debate, we encourage discussion. These children, you're right, are mostly from an educated and wealthy elite. And that will be self-perpetuating. So the challenge for schools is to make sure that that elite feels a sense of duty and responsibility to look after others and to put the wealth to good use so that it becomes a cycle of virtue. And instead of, Charles's big yachts and houses in the south of France and so on, which, in the end, it's all quite boring. You can only drive one car. You can only be in one room at a time. There's only so much caviar you can eat. Life is quite boring if you live your life in that sort of world. Giving and changing and transforming other people's lives is so much more interesting.
So there were some questions on this side, I think, if you're still here. No one? I thought I saw hands. Anyone else?
Any question? I'm happy to talk about any aspect of education. Independent schools, state schools. I've been on boards of state schools, boarding, day, London, country.
It came back.
I'll ask. Well, I wasn't going to do this, but I've been reading. I was reading some C.S. Lewis the other day, and he gives quite a good description of public schools, essentially. This is the turn of the century, right? So, 1910, 1920s, in which he's talking about the idea that parents would send their children to public schools in order to have what he calls the strangeness kind of squashed out of them. To what extent do you think that's still true in today's world?
Absolutely not the case. Look at me. I am really odd. I embrace eccentricity. I'm a complete and utter maverick. Who else spends half term in northeastern Nigeria? That's mad. So no, let's celebrate the mavericks, the eccentrics, the geeks, the children whose talents are as I said, completely asynchronic, who don't map onto an archetypal norm. And those are the pupils who generally go on to be the most exciting and entrepreneurial and different children. They're the ones who break the mold. And I think independent schools have actually learned to nurture those children. And they're often, many of those children turn out to be somewhere on the autistic spectrum.
Yeah.
But they tend to be the ones that are absolutely priceless in terms of moving that dial forward.
And as you were saying in your talk, it's celebrating failure, if you like. It's a cult of amateur heroic failure that sent Scott to his death. And Cheltenham College is quite a good example of a school that prides itself on having more old boys having been killed by tigers than any other school. And it's a metric they're very proud of. And many countries, and well, people would question that, but
You're going to make me do a league table of schools with death.
The obituary league table is really interesting. So the number of times a school gets mentioned in Times and the Telegraph obituaries, Eton is the top one, mostly because of it. It was founded in 1440 and it's 1,200 boys. The second school is Winchester. Stowe comes third equal with Westminster, which it's a league table I'm really proud of, because it's the league table of life itself. You know, what have you achieved over a course of your life that is noteworthy and admirable? And I think, you know, that's something that we should celebrate more of, the league table of life rather than the A-level league table.
anti-technocratic, I think.
Yeah. That might be the best note to leave it on, I think.
Yeah.
They're going to be chucking us out soon. So it leaves me again to say thank you very much again to Anthony and to Charles. Thank you for a really stimulating talk. And it's a real sort of celebration of what independent schools can offer. And now I have to do my plug. Apologies before I let you go. That's just to say that we have a special offer for the show. You can get a digital subscription to the Times and the Sunday Times for £1 for 3 months. It's generally 78. And our league table, because sometimes we do believe in league tables, is out on December the 6th. And thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.